In today's talk, I'm going to examine why this unique period in history, we are seeing an explosion of machine intelligence and machine learning technologies, why it's happening today, not 10 years ago or 10 years in the future. To really understand machine intelligence, we need to take a little look at our own intelligence and where that comes from. This tiny little mind increases in complexity exponentially, 2% day by day by day. That's how this tiny mind can very quickly learn how to walk and talk, recognize people and faces, and do all of these wonderful things in such a short period of time. When we think about animal brains or the human brain, we tend to think of it as one big piece, like one big blob of clever jelly. But it's actually created out of lots of different pieces, lots of different functions, which have evolved over time throughout our evolutionary history. We've got the sort of reptilian limbic stuff that's all about, food and fear and things like that. And we've got the most recent expansion pack for our brains, which is the prefrontal cortex, which enables us to strategize and to think logically about the future and outcomes. But broadly speaking, our cognition is split into two systems, right? It's called dual process theory. And there's system 1 and there's system 2. Now, system 1 is about intuitive thinking. It's about creativity. It's about things like dancing, right? If you think too much about dancing, you quickly get 2 left feet and you can't do it. You've got to just get into the groove and let your less conscious abilities take over. And then there's system 2. System 2 is all about rules. It's things like grammar, mathematics. It's very logical. It's very procedural. And we use both of these processes to get around in the world. If we only had 1 or 2, we would be severely limited. It is, in fact, a balance between these abilities that enables us to have the amazing functions that we do. The problem is that system 1 is how we generate models about the universe. We generate assumptions that, yes, the sun will come up tomorrow, and if you drop something, it's going to fall towards the floor. Machines traditionally have been programmed and constructed in a way that is purely logical and purely procedural. And that means that until very recently, machines lacked the ability to generate assumptions about the world. It was very difficult for machines to explore the world and generate understanding about it without having to be told. Now, if we think about our little 2-year-old child, there are numbers of different ways that child can learn about the world. We could put the child in a school environment with other children and an instructor up the front who gives knowledge out to them, right? And there's a curriculum, there are things supposed to be learned, and maybe there's tests at the end. That is what's called structured learning. And then there's unstructured learning. This is exploring, free form. There's no curriculum, there's nothing particularly to learn. It's all about exploring the environment and generating new assumptions about it, probably by putting a lot of it in its little mouth. And then there's another method, which is called reinforcement learning. I don't know if you believe this or not, but it's true. Even the humble pigeon, of which there are many in this great city, can be taught how to recognize tumors within biopsy images. And it's very simple. If they happen to peck at a tumor, they get a little bit of birdseed, and they follow that process over and over and over, and they actually become superhuman. Yes, even the humble pigeon is able to have superhuman, better than human capabilities just through this reinforcement learning. So that's learning in biological organisms. It's very similar within machines. We have structured learning, where we explicitly tell the machine about the world. We have unstructured learning, where the machine just explores and generates its own assumptions. And we have reinforcement as well. Now, when you handhold machines and tell them what they're looking at, what this specific traffic sign is supposed to represent, it works pretty well. Now, you might need to annotate or, draw little circles around different things a lot, many, many times, generating a large data set. But in principle, it works pretty well, certainly within a narrow field. But there's a real problem whenever machines encounter something that doesn't make a lot of sense, something that's ambiguous, something that can be taken in multiple different ways. And that's where machines traditionally have completely failed. And it doesn't just have to be a riddle like this. It can be something as simple as this. Is it a circle? Kinda. Was it intended to be a circle? Maybe. Did somebody intentionally paint it, or was it left behind by somebody's coffee cup? You see how things that are very banal, very simple, can actually have a lot of complexity behind them. But there are methods that we can help humans, help machines to think in a way that is like a human. How many of you are familiar with a game like this? It's sometimes called bagatelle. There's pachinko, for example. One of my favorite examples is the American version, which is plinko.
Christine, try for that car. Right in the middle. The car is right in the middle.
Now, the plinko machine on Price is Right is actually broadly similar to how neural networks work. You have a token on one end of it, and you move the token through the system, and it's very random, so you get different outcomes every time. But if you do it over and over and over, then you start to create a pattern. You start to be able to adjust how you nudge the token in one side or give it a certain weight or a certain spin. And if you do it over and over and over, you can actually start to generate an uncanny ability to beat the odds. And this token can be just about any information. Any information in the world can be tokenized and put through one of these systems. It's called a sigmoid function. And it's basically a way of turning anything from image data to sound data to textual data into a way that can be understood as an element that is between 0 and 1. For example, if we wanted to have a machine that thinks about car engine weights, right? And the range is between 1,000 kilograms and 5,000 kilograms, we would set the 0 at the 1,000 and the 1 at the 5,000. And so a 3,000 kilogram engine would be about a 0.5 on that scale. Follow? That's how we feed information into these systems. And this is designed to operate in a way that is very similar to how biological neurons work. And these neurons have been basically unchanged between a jellyfish and a human being for countless millions and millions of years. They're very good. They're very efficient at what they do. And in our time, we have been able to take the very logical, very procedural System 2 way of thinking of machines and start using artificial neural networks to create something that is much more creative, much more intuitive, and less locked down by logic. This is, of course, how our brains work and how our brains reconstruct images about the world. When I'm looking at you and you're looking at me, we're actually looking at tiny, tiny little features, a freckle or an edge And we're building them up layer by layer by layer to create an understanding of what we're looking at, and then to provide an annotation to that object. And machines operate in a very similar way. Look at tiny, tiny little pieces of something, rebuild these layers, sometimes called salient features, and layers and layers and layers of different information atop each other can then create an image of that object. And we can then apply that to a different system that can take that picture and figure out whether that's actually a dog or a frog. These systems have actually been around for many, many years, even since the late 1950s. One of the first problems they were used for was actually postal information, right? Lots of people draw numbers in different ways, and it can be very difficult to tell whether somebody's drawn a 5 or an 8, for example. So they created data sets like MNIST in order to capture lots of information on how people actually draw these figures so that they could be then understood automatically by machines. So machines need data. Machines are like a child in many ways. Children absorb information from all around like a sponge. They suck it up. And so do these algorithms. And in fact, companies like Facebook are using children's books as a way of teaching machine intelligences about the world, teaching us about the good guys and the bad guys and conflict and resolution and human emotion. Machines are learning like little humans. But it's very important to have the right teaching materials. The algorithms are not enough. There is a great gulf between when an algorithm is invented. Some clever person or clever group of people create a new way of creating a way of reasoning about the world. But it isn't useful until you've got data to actually train that algorithm. And in fact, there's a lag period, typically of about 15 years, between when an algorithm is invented and when it becomes actually available. Now, why we're seeing so much machine intelligence recently is because we have a heck of a lot more data. What does it look like? Well, it looks kind of like that. Ms. Lara Croft of Tomb Raider, right? 20 years difference. And it's not just graphical processing abilities, which is a large part of why algorithms are more powerful than they used to be. But it's all about the data. We are drowning in data. Throughout human history, from the time when we were banging rocks together, right up until the turn of the century, we created, as a species, about 5 exabytes of data. And yet we were creating that amount of data every 10 hours by 2010. And that amount of data again, by last year, every 2 minutes or so. Where does all this data come from? When you think about the fact that over 48 hours of video content are uploaded to YouTube every single minute, you start to understand where this information is coming from and how much of it there is. And increasingly, this information is now being created by machines, not just by humans. Or that data is being improved and processed and curated by machines. And so we have recordings of the human voice, we have pictures of people, we have medical information, we have characters in every single script under the sun. We have these large data sets, and it is this that is making machine intelligence smart. It's able to learn. We have a curriculum for these little brains to learn from today. It's giving them capabilities to make sense out of the world, to understand context for the first time, or to even understand what comes next, right? We use our prefrontal cortex to guess how things are going to move and happen in the near future. Machines are now getting similar capabilities. Now that's fun. And we look at it. And it's funny because until it arrives, we think that a machine that can do real-time translation between languages is AI, right? These kinds of capabilities are artificial intelligence, and it's amazing. And then we get it, and suddenly, oh, it's just a tool. We start to take it for granted almost immediately. And we don't think of these things as being machine intelligences per se. It's just a widget, a little gadget on your website that does a thing. We don't necessarily spot machine intelligence, even though it's all around us. Historically, in the 19th century, we got water piped into our homes, hot and cold if we were lucky. We shipped goods across the oceans in liners and canals. And in the 20th century, we got motive power, electrics into our homes. And that generated a whole new revolution in technology. Today, intelligence is a new utility. Smartness comes through a pipe. And 100 years ago, when you got electricity into your home, it was just lamps. And in fact, if you wanted to plug in an appliance, you had to unscrew a light bulb and stick it in the ceiling, right? When we first got electricity into our homes, we only thought about lighting. And it's later we thought about, oh yeah, maybe we could use this for heating as well. And it's today we have Xboxes and hi-fis and dishwashers and all that great stuff. We are on the verge of a similar expansion in our understanding of what we can do with these technologies. We are at the very beginning. As these technologies improve in their power, we're finding new applications for them, right? And they're exciting, things like beating human players at playing games like Go, which are very complicated, but they're also banal and simple, things like this. You can use this today. This is Google's Photos Assistant. And your vacation photos, this system can curate into beautiful video. This video was not made by humans, it was made by a machine, right? If you go on social media, websites like Pinterest, you can look at a photo that you find interesting, and they have a little widget that you can decide what you want to look at, and it will find you products that are similar to that. This is machine intelligence, but we often don't recognize it. We just think, oh, that's cool. So we're seeing how the massive amount of data that we have in our society today, which is increasing exponentially, can be fused into information and knowledge. And knowledge plus time means experience, particularly when we understand the human context of it. But we're going somewhere next. We're going somewhere very interesting. Machines are starting to be able to be creative for the first time, right? Here's an example. This is Neural Storyteller, right? Neural Storyteller can take an image like this and generate text from that image, a story, rather, from that image. In this case, it's been trained on romance novels. Your little sketch that you make in MS Paint can become a classical painting almost instantly. In fact, a team in the Netherlands have now created a new Rembrandt based upon these kinds of processes. This was not painted by Rembrandt, but I'm sure a casual observer could not tell a difference. None of these faces are real. They were all dreamed into existence. These people are not real. They're just figments of a machine imagination. Take a look at this. Look at these videos. The one on the left is pretty poor quality, and the one on the right is high quality. The one on the right has been generated using the one on the left. Machines are now able to clean up data in amazing ways. How many of you have vacation photos from 8 or 10 years ago taken on your Razr phone or some basic smartphone with a rather sorry camera by today's standards? And those were great photos, but today, they don't look so good. They can be improved, they can be made whole, they can be made good again. This is where machine intelligence is taking us and how the amount of data in our society is again increasing. Now, when you want to put data into a machine intelligence, you have to break it down into very tiny chunks. And even a small image like the one on the left, which is about 300 pixels by 300 pixels, if you wanted to put that directly into an artificial neural network, you would need about 270,000 neurons, which is a lot. So instead, we create superpixels, and we break it up into little blocks, and that's a lot smaller. It's a lot more manageable. But what if we were able to take that fuzzy data and then make it whole again? To take another gaming example, this is what Doom Guy looks like to these kinds of algorithms. This is the granularity of data that we can then make smooth and whole and natural. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a brick wall and open them again. Machines can do the same. Machines can imagine textures. They can imagine objects. And instead of having to have artists creating all of this content, machines can now do it for us. Systems like Word's Eye can take textual information and create a 3D model or a 3D space or 3D scene of that information. Now, we have some insurance companies in the room today. What about when the loss adjuster comes out to take a look at the scene and to gather people's statements? What if a machine could create a 3D scenario of how the accident happened, and if there are inconsistencies? Remember, if there are inconsistencies, there's no such thing. It just means one of your hypotheses are wrong. Machines are now starting to be able to mediate the trust that we have in each other. Now, we talked a lot about data, about how machines need lots of data to be able to generate awareness about the world. That may be about to change. Recently, there's been a fantastic new algorithmic suite that hints at machines being able to learn about our world from a single example. In this case, it's a character from Kannada, an Indian script. It doesn't just have to be script. It doesn't just have to be a symbol. Here, for example, we have a machine that thinks about a Segway and then syncretizes different vehicles into an imagined new one. This is a hint about where we're going with machine intelligence. Machines are now also starting to think about the world in a 3D sense. They're able to explore virtual worlds and translate that knowledge into real world. It could be a building like this, or it could be outdoors. Here we have an autonomous plane that is able to navigate complex environments like forests and not hit anything in real time. Now, at Singularity University, we have a company that's accelerated that actually has a drone that's about this big, pretty large drone, but they machine gun seedlings into bare hillsides in order to repopulate them with forests again, entirely autonomously. Another example of machines saving the day. This is COTSbot. COTS stands for Crown of Thorn Starfish. The crown of thorn starfish is an invasive species that invades the coral reefs off Australia. And here we have, these circles are called Haar wavelets. They're a machine vision technique. It has discovered a starfish and it is now injecting it with poison to kill it. Now, you can imagine how having scuba divers trying to do that job would never be practical. But here we have an autonomous system that can roam around in the ocean, merrily murdering starfish, and it's protecting our environment. Machines to the rescue. What about machines that could sit in that chair or shake our hand? Where are we today with that? Well, here's one example. This is from DARPA's recent assault course for robots, where they interact in a human-like environment. Whoops. Oh dear. Oh my. What a pity. It would be easy to look at that and think, I don't think that these robots are going to be shaking our hand and sitting at our desks anytime soon. But I'd like to show you autonomous vehicles back around 2006. This was the state of the art. Whoops. Pretty pathetic, right? Well, how about today? So here we have an autonomous Tesla that's driving on the highway, and an idiot human pulls out in front. And the machine is able to react and stop before any human could. And so we see that autonomous cars have gone from pathetic to superhuman in just a few short years. This is disruptive technology. Machines are able to learn from each other and share experiences about the world and understand how different vehicles operate or the silly things that humans can do. And it's this process that sees us going from something that looks really stupid, like a gimmick, like a toy, an art project, and then suddenly, bam, it's changing the world and it's better than you and I. Where are we going next? There's a wonderful sector or field of study within engineering. It's called control theory. And it started out being applied to things like fuzzy logic. I'm sure some of you are very aware of this idea of fuzzy logic. And we use it in things like controlling the temperature of radiators, right? So we want a range in which to operate. We don't just want a off or an on. And these technologies have evolved into things like PID controllers. And PID controllers are used on things like ships, where you have a range of different inputs, like wind, like the currents of the ocean, the engine that the ship is in, right? And the course you're trying to get to. And that's all very complex information. It's shifting all the time. And PID controllers can analyze all of those inputs. But you still need to program it with the specific input so it knows what it's responding to. We're now seeing a change. We're now seeing machines that are able to explore the universe and fall down and get back up again and learn to walk, just like our little 2-year-old child learns to walk and falls down a lot, but gets up again and gets better. Machines are now learning like humans, very much like humans, in fact. Here's an example of a bot kindergarten. This is machines learning about how objects fit together in the world, generating knowledge just like our little tiny human child. And it means that intelligences can be put into any range of different shells, different capabilities. And they're able to then understand the limitations of their bodies, what they can do and what they cannot do. And they can even do this within virtual environments. Machines don't need to learn in a physical environment. They can learn within 3D space. And these 3D engines can run 1,000 times faster than our reality. And it's a fantastic way for machines to learn without having a risk of injuring themselves or anyone else.
Welcome to New York, Barbie.
I love New York. Don't you? Tell me, what's your favorite part about the city? The food, the fashion, or the sights?
Ooh, Ooh, the food and the restaurants.
I love the food. Where else can you find so many types?
So that's Barbie. That's Barbie in New York. That's a machine intelligence that is embodied in something that we don't really think twice about, right? We don't expect Barbie to be smart. And there she is. No blonde jokes, please. What if your child starts to talk to Barbie and ask difficult questions about life, the universe, and everything? And doesn't contact you so much about those kinds of questions. And Barbie's listening, and baby Barbie tells Ken all about what little Susie told her last Tuesday. We're going to find a lot of situations where things we don't expect to be smart are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. Graphical processing chips, imaging chips, they can all be repurposed for intelligence, localized intelligence that is very, very small, very low powerful, very low in wattage, but very capable. Even the shoes I'm wearing today are smart. They have computers in them. They're created in India for people with partial sight conditions. I don't have one of those conditions, but I'm using them to gather information about how my limbs work for a prosthetics project. All sorts of things are smart, and they're about to get a lot smarter. And they're about to start talking to each other, and this is the joy of IOT, the Internet of Things. But when we think of intelligence, where does Barbie's smartness live? It doesn't live in the Barbie doll today. We probably think it lives in some kind of big iron like this. If you want a vision of the future of intelligence in 5, 10 years or more, it doesn't look so much like this. I think it looks closer to this. Like plankton in the ocean. Lots of little limited intelligences, but smart in their own narrow niche, interacting in an ecosystem with each other. This is another example. This is Open Worm. Open Worm is the first digital life form. It is, for all intents and purposes, alive. It is a tiny brain, the C. elegans worm, 302 neurons. And yet we can simulate this brain ourselves, and we can put this brain inside a robot again. So we have a virtual life form that's living in a robotic body, and as far as it is aware, it is a worm, and it's smelling things and touching things just like a worm. What I find really interesting is that the C. elegans worm is only about 302 neurons, and yet we're now starting to see hardware platforms that have over 1 million neurons or more, which is roughly equivalent to the amount of neurons in a bumblebee. Now, the bee's brain is probably a lot more complicated than our simplistic models of it, but it makes you think. And we can see how cognition is increasing exponentially, and how pretty soon we're going to be going from worms and bumblebees to mice and maybe monkeys, and before we know it, probably sooner than we today imagine, something like the human brain. Probably not the same, but something like it. And in fact, we're now starting to be able to command nature itself. We're creating APIs for the human body, for cells, for genetic engineering. And we were really, really making a mark in biology. In 4.3 billion years, we only developed 4 nucleotides, right? GATC. And yet, last year we developed 2 more, P and Z, for the first time in 4.3 billion years. Creation is our canvas. And we're starting to see biological computers. For example, there's a technique called DNA origami, which uses the natural folding properties of DNA proteins to create structures. Here we have nanobots, and these nanobots roam around inside the bloodstream. And they've been used successfully to cure leukemia in trials of 2 patients. But we can use those same techniques to generate computers. In fact, we can generate all kinds of logic gates and any kinds of structures we want. And so it's possible to generate a computer using DNA origami. And they've done experiments at MIT where they've injected these computers into, for example, a cockroach, and given the cockroach an onboard computer. And they're able to optimize that up to about a Commodore 64 level, right? An old computer from the 1980s. It makes you think. Maybe someday, not too far from now, you won't carry your smartphone on your hip, but inside the very fiber of your being. Something else that's intriguing about biological computing. We've recently started to really understand that neurons themselves operate with quantum effects. There is quantum mechanics going on in how neurons operate. And our artificial neural networks are simplistic models that model it in effective ways, but we're not sure how effective. We're not sure what this quantum spark does exactly. But it's different. You can play this game. It's called Quantum Moves. It's by the University of Aarhus in Denmark. And it uses human intuition to guide machines to making better intuitive leaps themselves using these kinds of quantum processes. Check it out. Coming back to hardware, machines as we typically think of them, approximate computing is creating a new way of deliberately computing things wrongly, right? So instead of 1 plus 1 equals 2, it's 2.01 or a little less. So it's basically wrong by design, but that creates a little extra fuzziness, right? And that fuzziness can be used for intuition, but it's also problematic. Why? Because with our current machine learning techniques, we can get close to truth, but it's hard to get precision. Close is easy. Precise is very, very hard. There's a lot of problems with what's called overfitting. Here's an example. We ask a machine intelligence to identify dumbbells and give us pictures of dumbbells, dream dumbbells. And it turns out it's dreaming a lot of human arms as well, because a lot of its images of dumbbells have included human arms. This is a clear example of overfitting too much to something. Another example. In these images, the annotations to these images are almost correct, but not quite, right? It's close, but it's no cigar. And the problem with algorithms is, like children, what they are exposed to tends to stick, and it's usually the things we don't want to stick. Things like this. Which hairstyle is the most professional? We do not want algorithms to inherit the biases, stereotypes, and stupidity of humans. We want them to be better than that. And if you ask me what's the greatest problem with machine learning today, it is that machines are wonderfully intuitive, and they're able to divine all sorts of fantastic outcomes that are eerily, uncannily correct. But intuition is still not logical. In many ways, these machines are a black box that, like an oracle, can tell us the future more or less, but it can't tell us how it got there. So for a long time, we're going to need a human in the loop. We're going to need a little adult supervision for our machine children. But machines are able to guide us as well. Sometimes the simplicity of children's thought can actually teach us things we didn't expect to be taught. And so one of the great new professions emerging is something called cobotics. It's where humans and robots work together to accomplish tasks. The humans train the robot how to move, how to operate, how to do a task. But sometimes machines can train us. This quietly was rolled out a couple of weeks ago. It's Google Goals. It's part of Google's Calendar application. And you basically set a habit that you want to get, like going to the gym before work or not eating that cake or whatever we want to do. And Google Goals can help to drive us there. Machines can help us to be better versions of ourselves. And it's possible because now machines are starting to map us as a society, but also as individuals. Machines are now starting to understand who we are from our conversations, from the things that we like, starting to understand our values and the principles that we uphold. And it is this capability for machines to understand not just pictures and sound and text, but us, human emotions, that is providing amazing new capabilities. Here, for example.
My kids keep me going.
What advice would you have given yourself 10 or 20 years ago?
To not believe, to not be so gullible, to not be so gullible.
Machines are able to understand when we feel vulnerable, when we're oversharing, when we just need a little bit of care and a little bit of tender attention. Let me pose a what if. What if mental and emotional care was essentially free for everyone on the planet? How more peaceful would our world be? How more happy would we be if we had access to this kind of support anytime we needed it? It is this promise that I believe is going to really change the face of our civilization. But if machines are to interact with us as partners, as friends, as colleagues, even as counselors, they're going to need to really understand how we tick, human values, both the soft, subjective kind and the hard, logical, deontic, legal kind. For machines to participate in our society as individuals that have agency, they need to be able to understand ethics. Like all children, machines require moral guidance. It's up to us to give it to them. And like children, we can't just ground them all the time. We can't just decide that they have to go to their room. I grew up as the only child of an engineer father, and I was instilled with a love of books by Asimov and Heinlein and Clarke, talking about how humans and machines could work together. But Asimov's 3 laws are an example of a supremacist ethical system, right? Because humans are held at a higher level than machines, and machines have to do what humans need to do. I would be very cautious of that. I think that machines need to be able to say no to us or to say no to other humans in order to protect us or to protect our privacy, for example. And I would beware of any system that put a machine in a context of needing to operate in self-defense mode. Because in almost any ethical framework that you can conceive of, self-defense is legitimate. Let's not make them defend themselves. The idea of humans and machines both having an element of personhood isn't so crazy. We already have an example of it in the corporation. Corporations can own property. They can sue and be sued. They have a legal personhood behind them, and machines are likely to have something similar in certain ways. And we're actually seeing a crossover between the corporation and the machine, and something called the DAO, distributed autonomous organizations, that have humans doing work for this organization, but it's more or less controlled by machine intelligence. In essence, your CEO is Hal, who's able to spend things like server bills and hiring people using cryptocurrencies and things like that. I wasn't really going to talk about this for at least another month, but a lot of people have been curious about it. I'm working on a framework for ethics for autonomous systems. It's called OpenEth. I started it with a couple of buddies that I studied with at Singularity University before I joined the faculty. And we don't want to explicitly set the rules. We want to find the meta rules, right? Edward of Lockheed Martin, are you here today? There you are at the back. You gave me a fantastic idea the other night, one of the open late nights. There's no traffic rules here. There's no lights. There's no even lanes in the road. And yet these people operate more or less safely, and everything gets done. And it's because there are meta rules, right? Basically, nobody wants to get hit or hit anything else. If we can find these meta rules, maybe we can find the areas that machines can operate safely with humans and not stand on anyone's toes, anyone reasonable at least. And I'll just close with this. We're starting to find naughty machines that need moral instruction. This isn't just like science fiction. This is real. This is real problems. Today, you might be contacted on the phone by an automated conversational system that talks to you using recorded human lines, but it's controlled by a machine. And you ask it, "Are you a robot?" And it will deny it. It will say, "Of course I'm a human." You're going to face a lot of that, a lot of things that pretend to be one thing and are actually something else. Recently, we've seen a couple of problems with naughty machines lying to the authorities about certain parameters. And we're going to see a lot more of that as well. This is a taste of things to come. Today, we put faith in other human beings. What an amazing crowd we've assembled today. And you've offered me all such wonderful friendship and warmth. I would like to see that kind of friendship and warmth coming from machines that understand humans like we do. I think that machines that can mediate and work with human relationships is the true game changer in the next 5, 10 to 20 years. And that is how we make machine intelligence accessible, safe, and fun for everyone in our society.